Have you ever heard of Milton Friedman?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Friedman is an interesting person, but Milton, the other Freeman, what's interesting to him is that he goes into it's known as deontology. And what it is, it's about Kantism, Voltaire, more or less purporting the individual and looking at stakeholder theory. So what it's about is if you look at a company, the Rainbow services, the trash trucks. It says Rainbow on the side.
I don't recognize it. But...
They're an employee they have a CEO, but they're an employee owned business where, you have these trash drivers earning $120,000, $140,000 a year. But it's because the company keeps investing into the people themselves that they see that growth is only possible that if you invest not just in your shareholders, but your employees benefit at the same time, because that will generate loyalty at the first notion. But at the same time, it will create innovation, because now all of a sudden these guys are wanting to, let me tighten that shot, are wanting to, actually invest their time in the company further to help it grow. So by extension, the company's growing, they're growing, therefore everyone's growing. So it's not just about shareholders anymore. It's not just about trying to make as much money for a few people, if you know what I mean. You have to take in the fact that your product will have a detrimental effect 2 years down the line if you don't have a contingency of protecting it so it's not thrown in a landfill and creates pollution and so on and so forth.
But they're missing a big point when they say they want the company to grow. If you find that you're outgrowing your competitor, he's not doing very well, and nowadays what you do is go buy him out. I think what you do is go say, hey, you can use some of these techniques I'm using and you'll catch up with us again. You should be encouraging your competitor so there is some competition.
Elon Musk and Tesla and all that? What's fun about the new space race between private companies is you have a Japanese company that wants to build a space elevator by 2050. You have the Norwegians and the Swedes that want to send these robots to meteors to start mining for different minerals. So what's interesting is that is healthy competition because they're sharing this technology. Yeah. And that's all on trademarks and copyright. And I find those two kind of things to be very hindering to innovation, if you know what I mean.
I think the science and the useful arts would do much better if you'd abolish the patent office and all patents.
Concurred in its entirety. But with that,
I've got several absolutely useless patents in my name.
Would you care to explain which ones those are?
Well, the company said, oh, you're doing something interesting here, let's patent it.
What company was this, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, it was, I think it was Autonetics in those days, and then it was Rockwell, and now it's Boeing. And they just thought that chip I'd made was innovative, and let's patent it. And somebody might want to use it, or, they use the patents for bargaining chips with each other. We want to use your thing, and we'll let you use some of these ones we've got. It's just a bit of an investment. And it just really embarrasses me to look at those patents, some of them, because incomprehensible for one thing and totally useless.
But at the same time, that's not necessarily by your action. Yes, you invented the product, but basically its policy of how it's affecting everything else is dictated by other people. So you shouldn't feel admonishment from that at all.
Well, no, I think it's some law firms keeping themselves employed, wasting money, but
gotta love lawyers.
I remember writing to one of those lawyers, I said, it's a total waste of the company's time. But the guy didn't stay. He went off to law school, and became an attorney, and then a district attorney, and then a state attorney general, and was governor of the state 3 times, and then got appointed Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Earl Warren.
Really? So Earl Warren worked...
Yeah, for Dad for a short time.
No way!
And he had a story about...
That makes sense.
There was a state political office known as the controller, which is something you never hear anything about, but it's an elected office. And it has some little power in the state. And they have a kind of an agreement that it goes back and forth between the North and the South. They take turns coming from Los Angeles or San Francisco. Well, the controller died, and then the governor has to appoint a replacement. And, well, Dad called down from his desk, called down to the governor's office and said, this is Joe Beek up in the Senate. Could I come in and speak to Earl for a few minutes? And she said, well, just a minute, Mr. Beek. Let me see. And she came back on the line and said, the governor says, come right down, Mr. Beek. So he went down to the governor's office and said, Earl, I want to give you some advice. And Earl said, well, I'd like to hear that, Joe. He said, O'Reilly just died, and you're going to have to appoint a replacement controller. You should get busy on it and do it right away. And Earl said, well, we haven't even had the funeral yet. Dad said, the day after the funeral, you should announce the replacement. Governor C.C. Young had a situation like this where he had to make an appointment, and he dragged his feet. And after a couple of months, everybody in town had given him their advice. And when he finally made the appointment, everybody in town was mad at him because he ignored their advice. He said, if you're smart, you'll make the appointment. And Earl said, Joe, that sounds like very good advice. Do you have any suggestions? Dad said, no, I'm not here to plug anybody. I will suggest some criteria you might use. We just had a war, and there are a lot of veterans trying to work their way up through the system. You'd be wise to appoint a veteran.
Which war was this? World War I or World War II?
This was when Earl Warren was governor.
Cool.
And he said Riley was from Southern California. It'd be good to stick with tradition, appoint another Southern Californian. And it's good to pick somebody that the people have shown their faith in by electing him to office somewhere. Earl said, those all sound like good criteria, Joe. Thank you very much. And his dad went out the door. Earl said, Joe, as you go back up the Senate, would you ask Tommy Kuechel to come down here? Tommy Kuechel was a senator. And Dad said, sure will. Went up and poked Tommy Kuechel and said, Governor'd like to talk to you. Governor? Yeah, why don't you go down and see him? In about 20 minutes, Tommy Kuechel came back up and came over and hit Joe and Dad on the shoulder. Said, you son of a bitch. And he was appointed controller, and he carbonated that into being a U.S. senator.
Wow.
Not a very outstanding one. You never hear of him anymore, but he served a term in the U.S. Senate.
Wow. But that was all due to your father.
And that was how that happened.
Wow. Now, how close was your father with Earl Warren?
Well, the family stayed together. The Warrens, when they'd come down to be the Grand Marshal of the Tournament of Lights or something, they'd stay with us. We took their daughters out for a ride in a motorboat.
So you guys were actually fairly close.
Yeah.
Now, the Tournament of Lights is interesting. Can you recall your first time seeing the Tournament of Lights?
No, because it was going on as I grew up. It was one of those things that happened every year. And at first, we'd go out sit on the pier and wrap up in blankets and watch it, and I'd generally go to sleep. I was so young.
Was this your pier right outside of your father's home? Or your family home, right on the South Bayfront?
Yeah.
Now, what was it like during World War II with the Tournament of Lights?
During World War II,
or let me better propose a better question. What were your experiences in Newport Beach during World War II like?
During World War II? Well, I turned draft age just too late to be drafted. I turned 18 in January of 1945, and the war was over in August 1945. So it didn't impact me that way.
What was life like here on the home front in Newport Beach?
It was kind of sad. All the Japanese were taken away. There were a lot of Japanese in my class.
Do you remember any of their names?
Well, I remember their names, strange to say, from grammar school. Or there was Isamu, and it used to be kind of a status thing to talk some Japanese. We had various phrases. I don't remember any of them now, but we did know a few Japanese phrases.
And you guys would throw that at each other on the schoolyard playground or something like that?
Well, we'd choose up teams for basketball, and the Japanese get chosen along with the rest. And I always got left to last because I was such a clumsy and no coordination.
But you guys would shout Japanese phrases at each other when you would play?
Well, we wouldn't exactly shout them. We just
practice
we could speak them.
Oh, that is.
I don't know whether they meant anything or we knew what they meant. I don't recall that.
Now, do you remember when they disappeared?
Yeah.
Or can you describe that?
Well, we knew they were going to go. The girls wore uniforms in high school. They all had to wear a dark blue skirt and a white blouse. That was it, to avoid the dressing competition between the girls. And on their last day, of course, they all came in civvies. They wore dresses and looked nice. And
why did they come in dressing nice? Was it because they knew that was their last time seeing everybody?
Yeah, yeah. It was. I guess they were making an affair of it, an occasion. I have talked with, since then, I worked with a guy who had been in a family that was sent away, and he was still pretty bitter about it. This is, in recent years. Said his father had built a lot of farm equipment. They had a farm, and he had this, I don't know what it was, a mower or something that he'd constructed, and here they were going to go away, and he was trying to sell this stuff off, and one of the neighbors came and offered him $10 for the mower. He said, $10? He said, that thing's worth $500. Neighbor said, well, you can take the 10 or you can wait till tomorrow and I'll just take it for free.
Really puts it into perspective.
He was kind of bitter about the way they got run out.
Did you stay in touch with any of your grammar school friends or high school friends when they left?
Oh, yeah. We had a great 50th reunion from high school.
And this was at Newport Harbor, right?
Yeah.
And these
and a lot of them, of course, were people that I'd been with since the third grade. And in fact, one of them, that third grade, still lives just down the street from me. In fact, I'm going to have to get in touch with her and see if she's still there. I haven't heard from her for a while. And
what's her name?
In those days was Ludy Bill Williamson. Her father, I think, was in real estate. And he was on the city council for a while, I think. And boy, I can't remember what her married name was. Her husband died. We took his ashes out on our boat. In my high school class, there was a guy named Harold Shefflin, who was big and fast, and he was quite a football star, became known from throughout Southern California. My friends from uptown, he came by one day walking along the bayfront, and I was out there on the beach with my other friends sunning, and he said hello to me. Oh, that was Harold Shefflin. You know him? Well, we took his ashes out on the boat, too. And most of them are gone. I kept a list. The president of my class, Eddie Miller, became the district attorney down in San Diego. Made the mistake of assigning one of his deputies to a very highly publicized case. The deputy got such a name of himself prosecuting this case that he ran for the office and defeated Ed Miller, who'd appointed him.
Wow. And so from high school, I know that a lot of your classmates current now or have passed, but staying in touch with during the war years. What were your? Did you guys play any games? Did you join the Observer Corps? Did you guys look for any Japanese submarines? What was the?
Well, I did join the Civilian Defense Corps or something or other, which I think was really just a sham, plenty of fun and games that we never amounted to anything, but we did practice going around and making sure that people's lights were out for the, we had a blackout so that we wouldn't be visible to any Japanese submarines that came along the coast. There was no indication any ever did. And as air raid wardens, that's what we were. And our air raid wardens took a course in first aid, which was shared with Yasha Heifetz and his wife. They lived on Harbor Island then. So there I was, taking first aid with Yasha Heifetz. And with the Andrews, well, there are no Andrews prominent now, but Isabel Andrews was quite a prominent civic leader, went around planting trees. She worked hard at getting the city forested.
Newport Beach?
Yeah. And they had... She began by working for my dad up at Sacramento, too. He was very much appealed to by this little red-headed girl and followed her career and was happy they moved into Newport Beach, and her son Bob was in my class, and the other son Allan Andrews was my wife's gynecologist for quite a while, but they've both died. I dated the daughter for a while.
And you guys all went to Newport Harbor together?
Yeah.
Now, as an air warden, what were some of the did you have were you in charge of any other kids, or did you ride around in pairs, or?
It was not very well organized. We did walk around from time to time, monitoring people for having the lights showing.
What would you do if you saw someone's light showing? Would you just knock on the door?
I'd go knock on the door and remind them that they're supposed to have a blackout.
How common was that you had to remind people?
Oh, not very common.
A lot of people adhered to the actual...
I remember one time I went to a house where they were having a party. There were a lot of guys I knew were in there. And after I delivered my messages, I went away. I could just hear a burst of laughter, lots of laughter from inside the house. So Allan Beek is being an air raid warden. Oh!
Now, I remember a couple of months ago you mentioned that you also were the harbor master, or...
No, Dad was the harbor master.
Dad was the harbor master in World War II.
In fact, they make a thing that he was the first harbor master that Newport Beach hired. That was in the days of Prohibition, and his job was to kind of hold down the rum running. And later on during World War II, he took a couple of, I guess it was a couple of years off from being Secretary of the Senate to be a ship captain and take a fleet of boats to the South Pacific. And he recruited, these were little tiny boats, only 100 feet long, to carry cargo into the very shallow beaches and little harbors that the big transports couldn't get into. And he had to recruit a lot of the crew, and he found some guys he were interviewing had been rum runners. They knew him from the old days.
Was this during the war?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, your dad then had a lot of interaction with these rum runners then, if they knew him quite well. Do you remember any stories of him telling you or any experiences?
No, it's just that after he'd interviewed this guy and convinced himself he was competent to man one of the ships, he asked him, he'd been around Newport Beach back in the 30s, yeah. Did you know who was the harbor master there then? Yeah, I know who it was. It was you.
Now, did you ever meet any of these rum runners later in life?
No.
Did your dad tell you any fun stories during the 20s or 30s from the Prohibition era?
No.
There was one interesting story I remember reading about your father that when he was manning the ferry, he noticed that there was a speedboat stuck on a sandbar and that he helped free it. And this was kind of very late at night. And the next day, your dad apparently found, or the next week, apparently found a box in the middle of the ferry covered in a tarp, and it turned out to be champagne.
I don't recall that story.
Ah, dang. It's in the book Body Balboa by Judge Gardner. So
I see. I have had similar experiences. We found a dinghy floating at sea over near Catalina, and it had the name on the transom. Well, we took it in tow and went along through the various harbors, and pretty soon there was a boat with that name, and they saw us with their dinghy, and they yelled, and we took their dinghy back to them, and here came a great big bottle of whiskey.
and what year was this, if you don't?
Oh, this was, 1960s, 70s.
Okay. Post-Prohibition.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Prohibition, you see, went away in 32 or so, and I hardly remember up till then anyway.
Because you were about 4 or 5 by that point.
My mother and her family were very, very strict prohibitionists. My uncle bought a ranch to produce produce to support World War I, and the ranch was covered with grapes, and he wasn't going to go in for wine. He was going to try to do useful things. But here was all this grape harvest just coming ripe, and so he harvested it and sold it before he tore the plants out and went to dairy farming. Well, his mother was just aghast that he was selling this wine to the wineries who were going to use it to poison people. She found out how much he got for that harvest, and she went and gave an equal amount to a temperance organization.
Wow.
That's the grandmother I had. She was quite a character. Lots of stories there.
What kind of stories, if you don't mind me asking?
Pardon?
What kind of stories, and do they interact with Newport Beach at all?
No. I guess the only thing I can think of was that before Mom and Dad were married, they came and visited on Balboa Island, where he was selling lots. And he was living here, and she was living in a rented place over there, a couple of blocks away. And so at night, when he went to bed, he'd turn out his light, and then he'd turn it on again for a minute and turn it off to wish her good night. Somebody saw that and thought it was German signaling, and there was, what's going on here? People got suspicious.
They thought your dad was a spy for a minute. Interesting. Now, can you recall growing up in Newport Beach, for example, in 1953 when the Boy Scouts came here?
Yes, I and various young ladies had been parking on all that plain land back there, which is now East Bluff. It was great for driving up there and spending an evening in a parked car. And I had been using it a whole lot, and then the Boy Scouts took it over. And the Boy Scouts went around. They had latrines. They didn't truck it away in a truck. They dug holes and buried it. And my wife later on laughed and laughed about the place where we'd been having our sport. She said it's all covered with little green things growing up.
I wonder why. Did you participate in that jamboree at all?
No, I wasn't a Boy Scout.
Not a Boy Scout. Did you have any friends that were Boy Scouts there?
Oh, I must have. I didn't pay much attention to scouting.
Yeah. Did it have from your perspective growing up, I mean, was that a very big deal to have all these Boy Scouts come to Newport Beach? Did it have an impact on the rest of the town at the time?
Well, let's see. I was away at college, I think, at that time. It had no impact on me. 53, yeah, well, I graduated from college in 50 and I got married in 55. So there were just a few years there where I should have been aware of it, but, well, I had a job. I was working over in Hawthorne then, and
And did you live on the island at that time?
yeah, I lived at the island, actually, well, on and off. I had a job over in Redondo and got an apartment over there in Palos Verdes for a while. No. And it really moved out of the family home in 55. But then after my marriage fell apart, I went back and lived with my mother for a couple of years in around 1980, shortly before she died.
So you've been living in Newport Beach. When did you come back from Palos Verdes, if you don't mind me asking?
That was during, let's see, I got a job there. Went to work for Northrop designing computers in 1952. And that took me to Hawthorne, and then Northrop sold that little computer outfit to Bendix, and it moved down to Redondo, and so I lived over there for, I don't know, a year or two.
And then that's when you came back to Newport.
Well, then that fell apart, and I got a job in Pasadena, and lived up there in an apartment. I just lived in Newport off and on as necessary, in between things, until I got married. My wife was, she was fourth grade school teacher. She took over from my fourth grade teacher when she retired. And
so she's taught at Newport Elementary? Or Newport
Well,
Grammar?
actually, it was located over here in Corona del Mar, which has now been wiped out and turned into a subdivision. There was a Corona del Mar school there where she taught fourth grade. Rex Brant's daughter was in her class, and she thought that was the best class there ever was, and she really liked Rex's daughter. They had a very good time. She read them Charlotte's Web. And she said when Charlotte died, she looked around that classroom and there was not one eye to be met. Nobody was looking up. They were all trying hard not to cry. That was one of the hardest things I ever did, was to read that story to my children without crying. Oh boy, that was hard.
Why was that, if you don't mind me asking?
Because E.B. White is just so good. Imagine setting yourself, well, let's see, now what will I do for my next book? Let's see if I can write a story that'll make people cry about a spider dying.
Above a pig.
Let's see if I can do that.
He seems to be...
And I've got another book with a story where he made a symbol of salvation out of a manure pile. And, you know, the artists often do their best work when they leave some colors off of the palette and just make it a challenge. And the writers, I think, have done the same thing. Their best stories come out when they have a challenge.